Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at something really interesting you shared with us. It's a YouTube video.
Yeah, from the Mr. Reagan channel called The Shocking Roots of Climate Change Hysteria.
Exactly. And, we like to get right into these complex topics, try and understand them quickly, but, thoroughly.
And this video, well, it definitely offers a unique perspective. It tries to connect the dots between older fears, specifically about overpopulation, and what we talk about now with climate change.
It's not just saying they're similar, is it? The video really argues that today's climate change discussion is, well, basically a direct follow-on, a rebranding, I think was the term.
That's the core claim. It calls the older fears overpopulation hysteria.
Yeah.
So we'll be digging into the historical predictions it mentioned, how those narratives apparently shifted over time.
Okay, so our goal here, just to be clear, is to unpack what the videos argue. We want to trace the connections it makes, look at the evidence it presents for this link between overpopulation fears and climate change.
But crucially, we're not here to agree or disagree with the video's conclusions. It's about understanding the viewpoint, the narrative it's constructing.
Right. Let's start with that overpopulation proto-hysteria, as the outline called. The video says this isn't new thinking, this climate worry. It traces it back, way back actually, late 18th century.
Yeah, that far back. The basic fear, as the video presents it, was pretty straightforward. Humans would just breed too much, we'd run out of food, run out of resources, chaos.
Sounds very Malthusian.
Exactly, that kind of thinking. The fear that population just grows faster than our ability to feed ourselves.
And the video labels this a hysteria. Why that specific word?
Well, the main justification given is that the really dire predictions, they just didn't happen, time and again, according to the video.
Ah, okay. And it lists some specifics.
It does. It mentions Harrison Brown back in 1954 predicting civilizational collapse by the late 50s or 60s. That didn't happen.
Okay.
Then William and Paul Paddock in 67, they apparently predicted global famines by 1975.
Another miss.
Right. And Paul Ehrlich, probably the most famous name here, his 1968 book, The Population Bomb, warned of mass starvation in the 70s and 80s.
A very influential book at the time, I recall.
Hugely influential. And the video also brings up the Club of Rome's report from 1972, Limits to Growth, predicting serious scarcity, even total depletion of key resources like metals and fossil fuels by the year 2000.
So a pattern of failed predictions, according to the video.
That's the argument.
Yeah.
And the video suggests that even though these forecasts were wrong, the underlying belief, the alarm, it didn't really go away.
Yeah.
The speaker characterizes it as becoming almost like a religion for the believers.
And Ehrlich comes up again, not just for the predictions, but for solutions.
Yes, the video zooms in on Ehrlich's proposed solution. Things like, well, using public messaging, the video calls it propaganda to make small families seem desirable.
And government action, too.
Definitely. The video mentions ideas Ehrlich apparently floated, like giving bonuses to women for not having children, or increasing taxes on larger families, even suggesting the government should publicly frown on big families.
Wow. Strong stuff.
Quite interventionist, yeah. And the video then makes a pretty bold claim. It says these efforts actually worked.
Worked? How so?
It points to the declining birth rate in the U.S. starting around the 1960s as proof that these population control ideas had a real impact.
Okay, so that's a key link in the video's argument, connecting the ideas to a demographic shift.
Precisely. And from there, it moves on to what it called even more extreme international actions taken under the banner of population control.
Like what?
It brings up things like mass abortions, forced sterilizations. It mentions China's one-child policy specifically, and it even touches on the idea of withholding aid during famines, referencing the 1943 Bengal famine, and connecting it back to those Malthusian ideas about letting nature take its course, so to speak.
Those are very serious allegations.
Extremely serious. And this builds towards the video's central thesis, that these overpopulation concerns didn't disappear, they just got a new name. They were rebranded as climate change.
Right, the shift. So how does the video explain that transition?
It argues the main fear narrative changed over the decade. First, it was supposedly a coming ice age in the 70s. You might remember some headlines like that.
I do vaguely recall some of that discussion, yes.
Then, the focus shifted to global warming in the 80s. And now, the video argues, it's settled on the broader, perhaps more flexible term, climate change.
And the video sees that term climate change as strategic.
Yes, it suggests that because climate change is so encompassing, almost any weather event, a hurricane, a drought, a flood, unusual heat, unusual cold, can be pointed to as evident. It makes the narrative harder to disprove, the video implies.
It also compares this to earlier fears about running out of fossil fuels, right?
It does. The speaker argues those fears didn't pan out, mainly because of new technologies like fracking, which unlocked vast new reserves. The implication is maybe similar ingenuity could solve climate issues too.
So this leads to the bait and switch idea.
Exactly. The video contends that the real goal all along has been population control, and that environmentalism or climate change concern is just the latest, most effective justification for propelling that goal.
So the science is just a cover, according to this view.
The video seems to suggest that yes, that the scientific findings on climate change are being leveraged, perhaps cynically, by people whose primary motivation is actually controlling population numbers.
Okay. And the video then goes on to talk about the alleged effects of this hysteria, first overpopulation, now climate change.
It does, and it paints a pretty negative picture. It links this whole line of thinking directly to falling birth rates in Western countries.
A direct cause and effect.
That's the assertion. And it goes further, making controversial connections to war and famine, suggesting that these population control ideas might have provided some justification or even made things worse.
That's quite a leap. And there were other connections, too.
Very provocative ones. The video links it to the rise of feminism, framing it as something that discouraged motherhood. It even brings up the increased visibility of homosexuality and transgenderism, suggesting these are viewed by some as factors reducing procreation.
Okay. The video also names, or rather organization. Which groups does it say were involved?
It lists quite a few. Planned Parenthood, the UN Fund for Population Activities, big foundations like Rockefeller and Ford, the Population Council, the Club of Rome.
Which we mentioned earlier, the think tank.
Right. Also USAID, the Gates Foundation, the WHO, the IMF, the World Bank. It connects these to something called the Draper Committee and mentions involvement from people across industry, the military, academia.
And there was an accusation about some NGOs.
Yeah, specifically some NGOs funded by USI. The video accuses them of becoming grift machines, essentially using the cause for financial gain, maybe money laundering, while still pushing that underlying population reduction agenda.
Wow. Okay, shifting gears slightly, the video also talks about culture, Hollywood specifically.
Yes, it claims Hollywood has played a part in pushing down birth rates through cultural manipulation.
By changing how families are shown.
That's the idea. It contrasts older shows, like Sound of Music or The Brady Bunch, which featured large, often happy families, with what it claims is a lack of similar depictions today. It mentions the Upshaws as a rare recent example.
So the argument is modern media makes parenting look bad.
Or at least less appealing. It suggests modern shows often portray parents negatively, or they romanticize childless couples, sending a subtle message against having kids, or large families anyway.
And then there's the sci-fi movie list.
Right. A whole list of films presented as propaganda stemming from these overpopulation fears.
Which ones?
Okay, let's see. Soylent Green, the classic, people eating people because of overcrowding. Logan's Run, execution at 30 to save resources. THX 1138, state control over reproduction.
Dystopian futures, definitely.
And more. Blade Runner, Mad Max, Waterworld, The Day After Tomorrow, Elysium, Snowpiercer, The Book of Eli, Interstellar, all according to the video, tapping into or reinforcing fears about too many people, not enough resources, or environmental collapse.
Does the video concede these might just be, plot devices?
It does acknowledge that, yes, that filmmakers might just be using these themes for drama, but it maintains that the underlying inspiration comes from this real historical alarmism about population.
Interesting. Now, does the video offer any counter-arguments or nuances to its own points?
It does offer a couple of points that could be seen as softening the it slightly.
Like what?
Well, it concedes that maybe the initial motives of the population control advocates weren't necessarily malicious. Perhaps they genuinely believed disaster was imminent.
Okay, so not necessarily villains from the start.
Right, but then it immediately pivots, arguing they failed to account for human ingenuity. It specifically cites Norman Borlaug,
the father of the Green Revolution.
Exactly, whose agricultural innovations drastically increased food production, arguably preventing the very famines people like Ehrlich were predicting.
That's a common counterpoint to Malthusian fears.
It is. The video also makes the point that birth rates tend to fall naturally as countries get wealthier and develop, which implies, maybe coercive measures weren't needed anyway.
Okay. Any other points like that?
There's one it calls a wild irony. The idea that CO2, the main driver of climate change concern, has also contributed to global greening, more vegetation growth in some parts of the world, visible from satellite.
Ah, the CO2 fertilization effect, though that's a complex topic with downsides too.
Absolutely. The video presents it somewhat simplistically as an irony, but then it quickly returns to its main critique.
Which is?
That the continued push about climate catastrophe from NGOs, governments, etc., isn't really about the environment. And it's driven by a desire for fear, control, and money grift, political donations, power.
It also criticizes geoengineering.
Yeah, solar geoengineering experiments are singled out as insane meddling. And there's the claim that scientists who disagree with the mainstream climate narrative are being silenced.
And it contrasts this with Elon Musk.
Right. It presents Musk as arguing the opposite problem, that we need more people for innovation, for economic vitality, pointing to countries with collapsing birth rates facing serious problems.
So the video's final message is, essentially, reject the climate hysteria, embrace reason, family, and what it calls traditional values.
Okay. So summing up the video's whole argument, it's saying that what we call climate change concern today is fundamentally rooted in and a continuation of older fears about overpopulation, a kind of hysteria, it claims, that has just changed its name and justification over time, but the underlying motive, population control according to the video, remains.
That captures the essence of the narrative presented in the source. And just to reiterate for everyone listening, our aim here was purely to explore and outline the specific claims and connections made within that video. We haven't verified them independently, and we're certainly not endorsing this perspective.
Absolutely. Which brings us to a final thought for you, the listener. Considering this historical narrative laid out in the video, the failed predictions it highlights, the arguments about shifting narratives and underlying motives, how does this perspective make you think about current environmental discussions or population dynamic? Does it challenge your views, reinforce them? Yeah, what are the implications if you start looking at climate through this particular, quite critical, historical lens that the video provides? It's definitely something to mull over. We encourage you to consider all the points raised, maybe do some more reading on the history, and think critically about the different ways these complex issues are framed.